Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome this week to the Football Letter Podcast. This week, we welcome 1993 Penn State graduate and Penn State football letterman, Bob Ceh. Bob was a snapper on the Penn State team in the late 80s, early 90s, notably snapping the game-winning field goal at Notre Dame in 1990 for Craig Fayak, true freshman. We'll talk with Bob about his time at Penn State. He arrived in Happy Valley as a student manager, then found that he earned a spot on the roster. Really great story, really inspiring story. Bob is currently the principal at Seneca Valley High School, about a half hour north of Pittsburgh here in Pennsylvania. We're going to talk with Bob about his time at Penn State in Seneca Valley, how he stepped up during COVID and managed that really difficult time there, and how the life lessons at Penn State that he learned, he carries with him through today. And we're also going to ask him about his former roommate, Rudy Glocker, who also was or is a guest this season on the Football Letter Podcast. So, Bob Ceh, thrilled that you're making time for us today. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me. Always been a loyal Penn State guy and love talking about Penn State, promoting it, and being part of any Penn State conversation. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I love your backdrop. You know, I see that Saturday afternoon and those colored trees in the back means it's football season in Happy Valley.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This was Steve Manuel, our ace football letter photographer. He gets these images every game. And so, yeah, Happy Valley on game day in the fall, nothing like it. Speaking of Happy Valley on game days, you know a little bit something about that. Can you take us through kind of, your transition from high school to college, how Penn State ended up being the school for you, and maybe when you first arrived at Penn State, you were student manager, and kind of how you saw your role on the team and how you could have an impact?
Yeah, I was an average high school athlete. I was probably a little bit better of a basketball player than I was football player, but I got really big hands. I could palm a basketball, I could palm a football, and in my days of playing, I've played in every game that I've ever put a uniform on except one, and that was when we went to the Coliseum. My first game, I did not play against USC, but starting in seventh grade all the way through, I played in every game except that one because I could long snap. And after high school, I assumed my college days were over. I didn't want to play college basketball. So I did get into Penn State. My older brother, Jim, had been a manager on the team in the late 70s, early 80s. And I've had two other siblings be after him that went to Penn State. So I spent a dozen years going to Penn State games, fell in love with everything there, and got an inside look at the football program, and a pair of black shoes at an early age. I think my brother got him out of Shope's room there without him knowing it. And, so I was indoctrinated very early into that and just loved Penn State. So had the opportunity. I got into Penn State, got hired on as a student manager, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the guys being there. I loved game day and just being around and being part of that fraternity. I often thought to myself, I'm around some of the most successful people. They're all high-level people, and there's so much to learn here and be around them. So I was fine with that. We had, and it all started when we would go on the road. And as a manager, I got to travel my second year. And they often only carried two long snappers in the travel brigade. And we always had two kickers going at one end and two punters at another end. And Coach Phillips at the time said, can you throw these balls back and simulate a snap? I said, I'll just snap them. And they saw what I could do with my big hands, and I could snap pretty well. And that planted the seed that maybe I could do this for them, that I was pretty good at it. So I think the end of my second year, they asked me to play in a blue-white game just to see what I could do. So I snapped in it, thought it was great. Nothing ever materialized from it. I went back to being a manager. I had no problems with that. And then in my third year, we had a situation where we needed a long snapper, and they had asked me, do you want to do this? And I said, I'm not so sure. And Joe said, I think you're pretty sure. I said, okay. And I dressed for USC, didn't play in that game. And then the next game was Rutgers, and I played in it and played in every game since then. And for a while there, I had such deep relationships with both managers and players that I just took on both roles. I still did some laundry and did my shifts that I was supposed to do there, and then they eventually replaced me, and I got away from that a little bit. But I still hung out in the locker room to keep on Shope's good side. For those lettermen that know Shope, you kept on his good side, him and Spider and all the guys. So just loved everybody there, and that was my story. And I snapped for 2 and better part of a third season then.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Joe Paterno says, "I think you're ready," or "I think you're sure," then that's a pretty good vote of confidence.
Yeah.
You said Spider. I was going to ask you about that. If you start talking about student managers, equipment managers, they talk about how Spider, his responsibilities went way beyond his job title in terms of being a mentor, being somebody there who players could talk to, could lean on. Did he have any type of that rapport with you, or I guess just what was it like to work with Spider? Especially knowing that was sort of towards the beginning of what would be an iconic tenure for him at Penn State.
He was just great, a great person to be around. And, he was just positive about everything and positive about everybody. And, he was just one of those comforting voices. And no matter what was going on or what the situation was, Spider didn't look rattled, and Spider never had an issue. He just did what was necessary and did it with a smile and did it well. And I remember him being interviewed for the Whiteout. The ESPN did a story on the Whiteout a couple of seasons ago, and they interviewed Spider. And Spider is Penn State. He's that guy that just loved this program and everything about it, and loved his job. And I can't say enough about the role model that kind of guy is. You just want to be around him. You want to talk to him. When you heard his name on ESPN, I couldn't wait to text him. And I remember driving up 22 from Pittsburgh and said to my wife, "Take the wheel. I got to text Spider." And how great it was to hear his voice, because he's, a lot of people will ask, well, what's the Penn State experience like? And it still comes down to people, and Spider was one of them. Now, Shope, he was the boss, but he was a totally different type of guy that was great in his own way. You just didn't mess with him, and so they were just like the yin and yang of that room. And it was always entertaining, always fun, and just great stuff from those guys.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing. There are so many. I feel like we could just have a whole season of just like stories about Spider, and he's been on the show before. And when you talk about Penn State being special because of the people, he's certainly at the top of that list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you were the snapper for arguably maybe the most iconic field goal in Penn State football history. I believe it was the last time that Penn State knocked off the number 1 team, 1990 at Notre Dame. Craig Fayek was the kicker there. We've heard Craig has talked about that kick, and it's one of those things where the snapper, if you're doing your job, nobody knows about you. When you're going out onto the field, we kind of want to ask you a couple questions about that. But I guess let's start with this. We've heard stories about the talk that Joe gave kind of the night before that game, having won 7 games in a row after a rough start, going into that game at Notre Dame, ranked number 1. What was the vibe of the team going into that game?
Well, it's funny, because I know in preparation for this, you had said what was one of your favorite Joe moments, and it was that speech at South Bend. And I remember we stayed at an old Holiday Inn. It was not a nice hotel, and we're sitting down there, and it's really where he basically said, "We are Penn State. We're not second fiddle to anybody." And I think at that time it was Notre Dame was the king of college football. And he really, it was the best talk I think I've ever heard in sports. And about him saying that we are something special. We do deserve to be here. People ask us, what's it like to go to Notre Dame? No, what's it like to play Penn State is the question. And that was what he got through to us that night. And I think everybody. I remember Brian Monahan was a good friend of ours, a local guy that, and we talked about that speech and how impactful it was. And then we went out there and we hung with him. And Joe always, he always said that. we can play with anybody, and there's really only 7 or 8 plays in a ball game that make a difference. You just don't know which ones they're going to be. And there was about 7 or 8 plays in that game that were the difference. And I think it was Mark D'Onofrio maybe that intercepted the pass late that got us the ball and got us down there. I remember him. I think it was him that intercepted it. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, I may get called out here and on to duty. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And Bill Spohr was the holder. I think the snap was a little bit low. In fact, I know it was a little bit low. Bill picked it up, put it down, and Craig got it through, and the rest was history. And, it's one of those things you sort of know what's going on the sideline, but you just don't let it get into your head like this is just something you do all the time. You're going to snap the ball. It's the same procedure. I don't care if there's a million people watching. The ball's the same weight. The distance is the same. Bill Spohr has been the same holder for my whole time. Nothing changes.
So following that, I'm curious, the 24 hours after that, the 36 hours, getting on the plane, flying back to Happy Valley, being around campus on Sunday, going to class on Monday. What was the following day or two like, for you?
Well, there wasn't any social media, and there weren't any text messages back then. So it was, we were in our own little bubbles, I guess. I probably didn't see anybody Sunday. And I don't remember what time we got back. I don't know if we all went out. I'm assuming we all went out that night, and it was a pretty good time. But there was just a lot of buzz around campus. And it does, to a degree, and I'm still a little bit uncomfortable, and some people might be surprised with this, about that attention, because Craig's the one that kicked it. Bill's the one that held it. D'Onofrio, he intercepted it, so I was never real comfortable with a lot of the attention on that. But, it's just a natural conversation piece. And it was fun. I mean, it was the collegian, picking that up on Monday morning to see the headlines, and it's certainly better than the alternative, right? Of losing a tough game to the number 1 team and having a conversation. Oh, you played hard, but you didn't come out with the victory. So it was very gratifying, and what a great way to leave Notre Dame. Because we had some epic battles with them over the years. I think one of my first games against Notre Dame, they had Chris Zorich, who was, he was like a man compared to me. And I remember him over top of me, and we played in Beaver Stadium the first time, and I'm thinking, this guy is going to kill me. He's going to knock my head into the stands, and he got a good shot at me, but he didn't kill me. So thankfully they got some protection for snappers, because he lined up right across from me. I'm thinking, what am I doing?
Hey, Bob, you hinted at something that I wanted to ask you about. So 1990, you talk about the attention being on Notre Dame. What's it like to play at Notre Dame? This is a Penn State team that had won 7 games in a row. That was ranked. And oh, by the way, in the previous decade had won 2 national championships. Was there a part of, and especially since you grew up, you said being so familiar with Penn State, knowing the history, I mean, was there a part of you that sort of took that personal, like, how are people overlooking Penn State? Is it, was there a different dynamic knowing that the history that you had, the relationship you had with Penn State growing up, or am I maybe making too far of a reach here?
I think that's probably the case for some people. It wasn't for me, and I know on my level, again, it wasn't like I was a heavily recruited athlete and I had to choose between Penn State and Notre Dame, and so I didn't get involved in any of that. Penn State's where I wanted to be. All my family's Penn State. My wife's from there. 2 of my kids go there now. I had 3 siblings that went there. I never really thought about it. I didn't like Notre Dame, but I didn't like any schools we played, really, and so I never really looked at it that way. And again, probably because I wasn't a recruit that was getting that type of attention or trying to compare at that time. I landed where I wanted to land. So
you're listening to the Football Letter podcast. We are joined by Bob Ceh. Bob is currently the principal at Seneca Valley High School in Pennsylvania, about a half hour north of Pittsburgh. Bob, you were an education major at Penn State. Having embarked on what I would say a career and a life in education, how did your time at Penn State kind of inform that passion that you have for education?
Well, I think I didn't know I had a passion for education until I got into it. I'd actually started as a hotel restaurant major at Penn State because that was when my brother was in, and I didn't know what else I wanted to do, and I thought that sounded good. And then I worked in a hotel for a summer, and I thought, I am not doing this for a living. But I wanted to coach. After being around the football program and starting to learn a little bit more and see it, I thought, this is something I can do. And so I switched majors and I got into that, and that became my career. And I just think there's so many parallels that I took from Penn State and my time there. And I know you'd mentioned the success with honor and doing things the right way, and never putting yourself above the organization. Sometimes, as individuals, we want to make it more about us than the team, or as this building here, more about the high school than the district, or at a college, it's more about the football program than the university. And I always felt that we were treated as whole people, and to develop as whole people were important. And so I think that notion of developing yourself and getting better, and the humility to understand that we're all just a part of something. We are not the something. I think that's what I pulled out of there. And certainly I could go on for longer with some of what I heard Joe say and the people that I was around. But I think those are the major points. And I think that, when you're in leadership, the whole idea is you're going to take the group of people in front of you from point A to point B. And that may be on a football field, it may be in the school district, it may be teachers, it may be students, it may be coaches, it may be players. It doesn't matter what the group is. And you sort of approach it the same way. And, and I always was impressed with Joe and how smart he was and how well read he was. And, and that's something I've sort of taken to heart. And I thought one of the first things when I came out of there, and Joe always stressed this, is you're not just a football player, you're whatever else you want to be. And I felt when I came out, I didn't want to be labeled as a Penn State football player. And I didn't want people to think I'm just getting this because that was my label. I want to be Bob Ceh. And if you want to add that on the end, that's fine. And I still get that. It's 2023. So this was 30 years ago. Right. And I still get that in front, the Penn State football thing. So I know how powerful that is. And there's a respect for that, certainly. And I think the power in that comes with how it was run and what I learned there. So it was a fantastic opportunity. I'm very grateful for what I got out of there. And I know even more specifically, I coached high school football for 22 years. And how many of the things that I took off of the football field and put it onto the football field I was on. And I coached at a couple of different schools. So, the 7 or 8 plays, it's a game of attrition. All of those things, run to the ball, get in a picture frame, those type of things they were ingrained.
So while you were at Penn State, I believe you said for 2 years you were roommates with Rudy Glocker, who we also spoke with this season on the Football Letter podcast. Rudy owns Virgin Outdoor, an outdoor apparel company in New Hampshire. His company stepped up in COVID-19, donating more than 10,000 masks to the local community. And during the COVID in 2020, seniors lost out on the graduation experience. Penn State seniors missed out on it. I just wanted to touch base on that before we kind of transition to a few other things about Penn State. Being an educational leader during COVID, and even after, making sure that you reached out to those students who missed out on graduation, that really showed a lot of leadership ability. Was that something that you brought with you from Penn State in terms of kind of the things that you learned there as now a leader in education?
Well, I think that's interesting because, COVID was something at the time, I don't know that I understood exactly the impact it was having on our seniors. And I'm not a big ceremony type of guy. I didn't even go to my college graduation. because rooms were too expensive. It was too crowded up there. I was just a number in a college. I said, mail me my diploma. But I realized not everybody's me, and that is important to a lot of people. And I think one of the things, I used the word humility before, that I had the humility to listen during COVID of where my gut instinct maybe said this. I had to get a lot more opinions because I was pressed to do more than I thought I was going to do at the beginning. And it ended up, I learned afterwards how important this was, and that you've got to really understand who it is you're leading and what's important to them. And so I was very grateful that I had a lot of very good people around me, our superintendent, assistant superintendent, my co-principals, that really helped to come together to design some things to make that more palatable, that whole COVID year. And in the end, at the times I got frustrated by thinking we have a national or international pandemic going on, and we're focused on ceremonies. But at the end, I was glad I was pushed that way, and I had the support around us to do the right thing for kids. Because now I realize how important that was for people. And, so you just got to have the humility to continue to listen to those around you. And so we did come together, and I think we had some pretty good plans and understood what everybody was trying to get to. And I think we accomplished that.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective. Because you think about things maybe you didn't think about before. And we mentioned Rudy. Rudy said that you were a pretty good roommate. I think he said you didn't snore too bad. He's not sure about himself. So here's your chance. Rudy Glocker as a roommate and a teammate. What can you say about him?
Well, I think it was Rudy and the other ones. I lived with Brian Curley and Chris Caesar. They always wanted it. The air conditioning was on all the time. And I get cold. I like it warm. And I'd go in February and they'd have it at 62 degrees. I'm like, what? Can we please turn some heat on in this place? And I don't know how they never got cold, but I was always cold, and it was always a battle, and then it was one of those things where you just came in and turned the thermostat and figured they're not going to know this for about another 2 hours. And then someone's going to, turn it back, and it became a little bit of a cat and mouse game. But we had a really good roommate situation outside of the temperature. None of us were control freaks. I don't think any of us were neat freaks, but none of us were slobs either. We had a pretty good comfort zone of how to operate with each other. And two of them had cars there, which was nice. So, they were always pretty generous with this and that. And at the time, so we had a good situation. I liked living with those guys. We had fun. And I know Chris Caesar was a baseball player, so he wasn't around much in the spring. He had gone and done his thing there that way, but the rest of us got along pretty well. I enjoyed it. And I know Rudy got me into reading some things I'd have never read before. I wasn't reading a thing that wasn't required for class. And he got me into reading some books. Said, hey, B, you ought to try this book. This is pretty good. And I'm like, well, okay. And I tried some things, and I'm a big reader now. And I think that's part of that started with Rudy. And the bad part, not about Rudy as a roommate, is what a tremendous athlete. And I'd have loved to have seen what he could have done had he stayed healthy for 4 years. Because I don't know if he had 2 or 3 knee injuries. But every time he started, he came as a tight end, was going up the ladder, and then he got hurt. And then he came back and switched to defense. He was going up the ladder, playing defensive end. Then he got hurt. And, he never really got off the ground. And I think, boy, what a shame that for athletic talent. I know he probably doesn't look at it that way. He was very level-headed about things. And, if he got down about it, he never really showed that. I know the crutches wore on him after a while because, that campus is not a crutch-friendly place. There's a lot of miles to be covered going to classes, and, it stinks to have crutches, but he seemed to have them too often.
So, yeah, and it's you talk about, one of the things about being a student athlete is, perseverance. And he talked about kind of like the lessons that he learned at Penn State in terms of being a leader and being involved in some student organizations as a grad student. We'll certainly pass along kind of like that sentiment to Rudy. One more thing about Rudy, because he gave us a little bit of an inside scouting report on you, Bob. He said that he hinted that you were a ferocious open field tackler and that you got a couple good licks on some teammates during drills. Was that true? Were you known for your open field tackling ability after snapping the ball?
I was a sarcastic kid to a degree, and I think I had maybe 9 tackles one year. And I don't even remember who I said it to one time. They said something busting my chops about it. I said, listen, you're a recruited scholarship athlete here, and I got more tackles than you over your course of time, so I don't want to hear it. So I think, I had 9, but I remember we played New Orange Bowl, and I don't remember. We played Miami, and I can't remember if it was Michael Irvin, the playmaker. I went down to tackle him. He made me look like I had never even belonged on a football field. I think I missed him by like 6 yards and looked silly doing it. I'd love to see that film again. Well, maybe I wouldn't want to see it. But I missed some too. And we played not the Orange Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl. We played Tennessee, and that was back when you had a lot of wall returns. They'd set up walls, so I would be the first one down, and that runner would start running towards the wall, and you'd turn, and there was no protection. You just got lit up, and so I got depleted a couple of times. I think I got concussed and didn't know it because that wasn't popular in the 90s, or it was heroic, one of the two. And so I got cleaned up a couple of times too.
All right. Rudy said you got a couple of good licks in though. So hopefully it all evened out.
I got 9.
Couple of quick hit questions for you, Bob. Playing at Beaver Stadium, what do you remember about that experience?
Well, I remember I liked the games without television so much better. And we don't even know that today, but when we played a game in the afternoon at 1:00 and there was no TV, boy, did they move fast. And there weren't all these downtimes and commercial breaks, but just the atmosphere at Beaver Stadium is, and I always remember riding those blue buses over and through the from the East Area locker room, and we used to go back and bring those buses in, and you felt like a king. That's how important that was. And I know they've made that tradition a little bit better now with how they do it and the blue buses. But going in there and the fact that we were so successful in Beaver Stadium, it was just the crowd, the student section, the we are's, all of those things that have certainly been amplified over the last 20 years is, these games are not just football games anymore. They're entertainment productions. They've got people that are producing these to create the environment that's awesome. And and I can remember being in a huddle a couple of times, whether it was a timeout, we were just waiting and just looking around and taking in the moment. Not enough to get spooked out like, oh, I hope I don't screw this up, but enough to realize this is a special place. There's back in, I think when I played, it was 96,000 people was the capacity, and just, and even getting to know the people at Beaver Stadium, like Bob Hudsick, who was the field guy, and talking to him on the sidelines. And I can remember during the games, Chet Furman and I, the old strength coach, we used to stand there and talk a lot. Just little things you remember, always standing next to Joe, so I got on TV a little bit more when the games were televised, so a lot of those things you remember, and, going out of the locker room after the game, and my parents would always be there. And then we used to go to the Elks for dinner out in Bullsburg, and the whole experience. Plus, when they come up, they'd always leave me the $20 bill, and it was nice. So game days were fun. Yeah, they were a lot of fun, especially when we won.
Yeah, which was pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
Favorite story about Joe Paterno, or maybe a story that kind of really, embodies his, approach to the overall student athlete experience?
Well, I think a lot of what I mentioned already in the speech at Notre Dame, and just, I know when he had George Bush come into our facility, I thought, wow, I'm just a kid with big hands that can snap a football, and I'm sitting 4 rows behind the president of the United States who came to State College because of Joe Paterno. And I can remember that moment. And I think that Joe just had that need to always want to get better and to take care of the little things. And those were ingrained in what I do now. And I think that legacy for me it was such an important part of my college career of what he did for me personally and how I've used some of those things. And not just Joe, there's a lot of good people, even I remember one of the trainers, Bill Ford, who ended up going to Buffalo. And this is just a little thing, but he always used to say, don't ever put your helmet on the ground out there. It's like a time bomb. If someone gets tackled on the sidelines, they land on a helmet that you set down, they're going to get really hurt. I used that for 20 years in coaching. Joe Serra, put your headgears on. You never know when a bolt's going to fall out of a plane. And so I always told our kids, keep your headgears on. You never know. Just so all of those experiences from all of those people, just so many memories. I could go on forever with it.
Here, well, it sounds like, Bob, we'll have to have you on the show again. But this is the Football Letter podcast. We're talking here with letterman Bob Ceh. Bob, just a question or two to wrap up then. How often, do you run into Penn Staters knowing that you work and live a half hour north of Pittsburgh? You've got kids back here on campus. You said as students, just how often do you run into Penn Staters and are reminded that, this alumni base, this fan base, they're passionate about this university and kind of what we're doing here?
I don't run into as many people that I knew from college. I run into Penn Staters now that we didn't know each other at Penn State, but because we're in the community, we get to talking about Penn State football. And there's some people that I live around in my neighborhood that are very passionate. And so that makes it nice. And I do go up to a lot of games. In fact, my son just got named as a GA at Penn State. So, and he was a manager for 4 years. So my daughter's up there. So we've got the same tailgate spot that we've had for quite a while. That Letterman has a great little area for us. And I run into a lot of the guys I played with, either in the Letterman's lounge or in that parking lot. And you think about even those two things as a way for us to stay connected forever to that program. And just with the lounge and a parking lot. And that was all designed by Joe, I believe, I think. And because he knew that was the strength of this program, was the people. And so beyond that, as I'm in my neighborhood or I see kids now in our building go to Penn State, they all get a special wink like, yeah, good job. You'll like Penn State.
Well, just to wrap up then, Bob, if you're talking with a high school recruit, a high school senior, as I'm sure you do all the time in your role, what's your pitch to them about what Penn State can offer them? Maybe not just for the next 4 years of their life, but really, for the next 40 years.
Well, I got to be really careful with pitches, because I try not to tell them what can offer them, but I'd say, if you want to know, this is what it offered me. And Penn State isn't for everybody. It's a big university. So I as much as I josh about it and I am loyal to it, I realized that was for Bob, but it may not be for you. And, I've got a son that's in high school right now that, I don't know if Penn State's going to be his spot or not, and I don't want anyone to go living my dream, so if you decide to go now, I'm going to talk it up now, but I'm careful as to not sway that decision ahead of time, because it's important that everybody pick what is good for them. And I think a lot of people pick Penn State for the right reasons, it's obvious to the amount of people in the backdrop behind you, it's a large school and there's a lot of people there. But once you commit, I will pitch it to anybody because I have such fond memories and what it did for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, we appreciate your time today. You chose Penn State. I think we can agree it worked out pretty well for everyone. And so I appreciate your time today here on the Football Letter podcast. We'd love to have you back again. And thanks again for your time and for sharing your Penn State story.
Thank you. Love talking about it all the time. Thank you, John.
Going to the championship! Let's go beat Michigan! Let's go beat Michigan! Let's go beat Michigan! We're going to beat Michigan next week! We're going to do it! We love this song! We love this song!
The mighty sound of Maryland. We hope to see you back here Saturday, November 18th, for the next host Michigan.